It's strange how some people can spend an entire evening complaining about work, about people, about being tired. And then the second they finally get a quiet moment alone, they don't know what to do with it. They scroll, they text someone, they turn something on in the background. Almost like silence itself feels uncomfortable. And if you've ever noticed that some people complain constantly about life feeling overwhelming, but also seem unable to slow down or stay home for too long, there's usually something deeper happening underneath that. Because a lot of the time, excessive complaining isn't really about the situation, it's about overstimulation, about emotional exhaustion that someone hasn't fully recognized yet. And strangely, many people today are far more socially overloaded than they realize. Not lonely, overexposed. There's a certain kind of person who feels emotionally drained all the time, but keeps saying yes to plans, keeps replying instantly, keeps staying available, keeps surrounding themselves with noise, conversation, updates, opinions, expectations. And after a while, their nervous system starts leaking tension in small ways. Complaining becomes one of them, not because they're dramatic, because mentally, they never fully come back to themselves. You can usually see it in tiny behaviors. They overanalyze texts after social interactions, replay conversations in the shower, feel oddly irritated after spending too much time around groups. Even people they like need hours to recover from things that weren't a big deal. And when they finally stay home with no plans, no pressure, no performance, they suddenly feel calmer without fully understanding why. That's not laziness, that's relief. A lot of people grew up associating constant social involvement with being emotionally healthy. Being busy meant being wanted. Being available meant being good. Being alone for too long almost felt suspicious, so they learned to override their own need for stillness. But the body usually keeps score. Eventually, the mind starts expressing exhaustion indirectly through irritability, through criticism, through constant low-level complaining about everything and everyone. And here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes people who complain the most are actually people who rarely feel emotionally settled, not because their lives are objectively worse, but because they're rarely in environments where their nervous system can fully unclench. Home, for some people, is the only place where they stop performing. No eye contact to manage, no reactions to monitor, no pressure to be interesting, responsive, funny, productive, emotionally available. Just quiet. Soft lighting, a blanket, a familiar room, the absence of social demand. And psychologically, that kind of stillness can feel deeply regulating, especially for people who spend most of their lives unconsciously adapting themselves around others. But many people are taught to feel guilty for enjoying that. They start calling themselves boring, antisocial, unmotivated, when really they may just be overstimulated from years of constant emotional exposure. Because modern life rewards visibility, constant interaction, constant accessibility, and some people slowly lose touch with what their mind actually feels like without all the input. That's why staying home can feel strangely emotional sometimes, not sad, just unfamiliar. There's a moment when the noise finally drops, and a person realizes how tense they've been the entire time. And often, the people who complain excessively aren't weak or negative people. They're overloaded people. People who haven't had enough psychological silence, enough unstructured time, enough moments where they don't have to interpret other people's moods, expectations, or energy. Complaining becomes a pressure release valve, a socially acceptable way to express internal fatigue, because saying, "I'm overwhelmed by constant stimulation" sounds too abstract. But saying, "everything is annoying lately" feels easier. And the deeper pattern usually starts early. Some people were conditioned to stay emotionally alert all the time, to read rooms carefully, to avoid disappointing people, to stay agreeable, to remain reachable. So their brain never fully exits social mode, even when they're technically resting. That's why true solitude can feel so different from isolation. Isolation feels empty, but intentional stillness often feels safe, warm, restorative, like finally being somewhere your personality doesn't have to brace itself. And once someone experiences enough of that quiet, they begin noticing how overstimulated the world actually is. How much of modern life is constant emotional interruption, notifications, conversations, expectations, background noise, performance. No wonder so many people feel mentally crowded all the time. No wonder irritation spills out sideways. Because sometimes the issue was never that life was unbearable. It was that the mind never had enough silence to process it properly. And once you see that pattern, you start hearing complaints differently. Not always as negativity. Sometimes as exhaustion disguised as conversation. Sometimes as a nervous system asking for less. Less noise, less pressure, less performance. It was never random. It was a pattern. And once you notice it, you can't really unsee it anymore.